There's something for every imagination at your local comic shop. Visit ComicShopLocator.com to find a store near you.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Dan Wickline Show. Today, we are going to be talking about Moon Knight. Show debuted Tuesday night, Wednesday, and the first episode was pretty spectacular, I got to tell you. I had kind of measured expectations, and they exceeded mine. So we are going to be talking about that, but before I get into that, I want to bring JD in here because I have to ask him a question. He was just telling me that Mystery Science Theater 3000 is going to be doing a movie called Robot Wars that starred Gary Graham. And now I question, are you talking about Robot Jocks?
You know what? I was incorrect when I said that, because Robot Wars is actually the sequel to Robot Jocks. Now that I'm looking at it,
I like just the fact that you mentioned the guy who was the cop on the Alien series, and from that I knew you were talking about Alien Nation, the series.
No, that was impressive. Yeah,
that you were talking about Gary Graham, and I knew that the alien in that series was Eric Pierpoint, and I knew that Gary Graham had been in Robot Jocks.
Oh man, that's a delve down the mental pathways there, isn't it?
Yep, not bad for a guy that 2 hours ago was in the emergency room.
Well, apparently you get smarter the more blood you lose.
Apparently. Yeah. It turns out bleeding like a rainbird sprinkler gets the brain going. All right, folks. We are going to get into this. By the way, JD, before you go, do you know the show yet? How the sales did the big Moon Knight page sell?
Oh, you know what? I don't know, but I'll find that out and I'll get that for you before the end of the show. Yeah,
that and the John Romita Jr. page Moon Knight cover were the two big things. So I want to know if they sold. So, all right, folks. Moon Knight dropped. And like I said, it was pretty spectacular. I got to tell you, if for some reason you've been living under a rock, or in a cave, but under a cave would be interesting. It's the blood loss, I'm telling you. If you don't know, Moon Knight is a new Disney Plus series based on. Well, let me give you the description from IMDb. A former U.S. Marine struggling with dissociative identity disorder is granted the powers of an Egyptian moon god. But he soon finds out that these newfound powers can be both a blessing and a curse to his troubled life. That is such the most over-the-top, knows nothing about the character synopsis that you could possibly... But other than the fact that it says, an Egyptian moon god... Because if you know anything about the Egyptian pantheons, there's like 6 different gods that go, no, the moon's mine. I'm the moon god. No, I'm the moon god. So the fact that they used an Egyptian moon god is actually perfect. The first episode dropped, and it's called The Goldfish Problem, a really good title, since that turns out to be a key moment. And the description for The Goldfish Problem simply says, Stephen Grant learns that he may be a superhero, but may also share a body with a ruthless mercenary. I don't think that's what he discovered in any of us. I think he thinks he's crazy being chased by a giant bird-like creature and that there's somebody else living in his head. That's pretty much the extent of what I think he thinks, and that fish can grow back fins. All right, let's get into the episode. I've got a good breakdown here. By the way, We are live. You can jump in at any point, ask your questions. If you got something you want to know about, something like that. At some point today, JD will probably pop in. Not the JD that does the show, but JD the artist will probably pop in and go, "What's the topic?" So hopefully this guy will clue him in. So this episode, absolutely fantastic. And please, by the way, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. We're trying to build the site. The more there's more stuff you can do with YouTube when you get to a certain number of subscribers. We're building towards it. We're close, but we need more subscriptions. So if you're watching on Facebook, can you do me a favor? Go over to YouTube and subscribe to the experience. And we'd greatly appreciate it. Hit that notification button, that stuff. It would be greatly appreciated. All right. So Moon Knight, the Goldfish Problem. We open up in a very interesting way. We don't open up with the hero. We open up with the villain. And the opening scene has Ethan Hawke, who's playing Arthur Harrow. Now, if you're a comic reader, you might remember Arthur Harrow. He's from the first full Moon Knight series. He was a villain in issue number 2, and he was pretty much a throwaway villain. He was used to do Nazi pain experiments, and he was being paid now to continue them on, and he's lived his whole life in pain, and that's pretty much his backstory. He was done in one episode, one issue. That's it. So I think what they're doing is they have a different villain in mind that they're going with, and if it's who I think is, kind of a variation of the Sun King. The Sun King never had a real name. So I think they're using Arthur Harrow, or they're coming up with their own villain as the avatar of Amit. But, so that's a possibility that they're kind of doing their own story, which, hey, more power to them. So I think they're just borrowing the name Arthur Harrow and giving it to this guy without necessarily doing the Arthur Harrow story. Now, when we first see him, it's set to Bob Dylan's song, Every Grain of Sand. And this is interesting because this particular Bob Dylan song comes from a period in life where Dylan had become a born-again Christian, and his songs took on more of a spiritual and religious tend to them. And in this particular one, it's about finding God everywhere, and even in every grain of sand. I mean, that's basically what the lyrics is. It's in the fury of the moment, I can see the master's hand in every leaf that trembles, in every grain of sand. So you get that big line and then a harmonica solo because it's Bob Dylan. But while all this is going on, you see this ritual that Arthur Harrow does, and it looks like it's one he's done many times before. He rubs around the rim of a glass, gets kind of a chime going. He drinks the water from it. Then he wraps the glass in a towel, smashes it, and then takes the shards and puts them in his sandals. And then he puts the sandals on and walks on the shards of glass. Now, why he does this, in religion, there's some extremists, some devotee that show their devotion through things like self-flagellation, wearing hair suits, things like that. They cause themselves pain as a sign of their piety and their religion, their devotion to God, or the God that they believe in. In this case, it's Amit. But so he's doing this as a way of showing his devotion to Amit. So that's how we're introduced to the character. So right there, you get the idea that he's kind of serious. So we cut out of that scene, though, into the standard Marvel logo. It doesn't get its own. Moon Knight doesn't get a special logo. It's the one that we got for most films. It's not the Spider-Man one, because when Spider-Man's in the movie and it's a Sony back thing, then he shows up in the opening logo. But when it's not a Sony involvement, he doesn't pop up in it. So it's the non-Spider-Man Marvel Studio logo. And it's set to a song by Engelbert Humperdinck. Now, for those of you under the age of 40, I didn't make that name up. though technically he did. His real name is Jerry Dorsey. And he decided that to be a big singer, he needed a big name, like Engelbert Humperdinck. And I really would love to have Engelbert Humperdinck meet Benedict Cumberbatch, because I think that could just be the tongue twister of a lifetime. Anyway, the song is called A Man Without Love. And the song talks about waking up and realizing you are lonely because you don't have love. That all this in your life, but you don't have love. And that's Stephen. Is basically, we're introduced to Stephen. He's this mild-mannered man. And when other than in comics or comic-related properties do we use the term mild-mannered? Do you have any friends of yours that you say, well, hey, who's this Dave guy? Oh, he's my mild-mannered friend. But you do have some mild-mannered friends, don't you? Anyway, so Stephen works at the gift shop at a museum that's doing a big Egyptian exhibit. He owns a one-finned goldfish like Nemo, and the fish is named Gus. And he shackles himself to a bed, the post next to his bed at night, so he doesn't wander off. And he also puts sand around to show that he hasn't gotten out of the bed. Now, we don't really get any sense of time here, as in how long he's been doing this. Is this a new situation? Now, we get a little bit later, but still not a lot. We eventually learn that it's been at least a few months, but we don't get a definitive sense of time. Also, something to note is that when he puts the sand out around the bed, you would think that he would follow the shape of the bed, but he puts it in a circle, which evokes like a protection circle from when you're doing magical rituals and stuff. So I'm wondering if that's supposed to give us a kind of a hint that we're going to be dealing with magic, the supernatural, or if it is a kind of protection spell. That because he is dealing with different gods, so it's possible that he's that it's kind of a protection spell from the other gods. So have to keep an eye on that. We end up seeing Stephen call his mother, except he's not talking to his mother. He's talking to her voicemail, and he leaves this really long message, and he does it a couple times. And I don't know about you, but I don't know that many people whose messages you can leave that long of a message. So, is it really his mother, or is it, I don't know. I get the feeling that there's nobody on the other line, because he never actually talks to her. He just leaves messages, and she sends him postcards, but the postcards look like the postcards they sell at the museum. So since he hasn't spoken to her, and the postcards are looks like they're coming from the museum, does she even exist? I think that's our first mind question there, or our question there. Now, we see through all of this that Stephen has and I'm using the name Stephen because at one point he's called Stevie and he corrects it. He's also called Scotty at one point, but that's completely different. But he has an interest, and we see it throughout his apartment. He has this interest for Egyptian iconography. There are decorations in the Gus's fish tank that are pyramids and statues of different Egyptian gods, stuff like that. You see books and all these things around his room. So he's got it bad for the Egyptian pantheon and stuff like that. So him working in the museum makes sense, except he's not working as a tour guide and like that. He's working in the gift shop. So, but this whole scene and his walk to or his trip to work and all that stuff is supposed to make us feel sorry for him, to show that he's kind of a loser. He's kind of a sad sack in a sense. And I liken this to a much subtler approach to doing this than we saw in Wonder Woman 1984 with Barbara Minerva. Barbara, they did it way over the top. It was way too much. But here with Steven, they do it, and it's subtle. There's no overly cringeworthy moments other than dealing with his coworker, Donna. But the rest of it, he falls asleep on the bus. He's late for work. The guard gets his name wrong. All of these things set up for, that shows his life that, we're getting that his life is kind of dull and then the wrench gets thrown into it as we see that somehow, unbeknownst to him, he has a date on Friday night with this cute tour guide girl named Dylan, who seems very excited to be going out with him, talking about how they're going to go get the best steak in the city. And Steven doesn't remember asking her out. And he goes, wait, are you asking me out? And she's like, oh, you're so funny. Well, so he doesn't know that he has a date with her. And he's trying to figure that out. But the trick thing is that Steven's a vegan. So he's got a dinner date for a steakhouse, and he's vegan. So Donna calls him out on that. And Donna almost seems interested and friendly to him for like a split second when she finds out he has a date, and then goes back to bossing him around and stuff. So from there, we follow him on his way home, where he stops and gets a burrito and sits down and has a conversation with, those guys, the street performers or the mimes that will paint themselves like silver or gold, in this case gold, and then act like a statue. Well, he sits down next to one of them and is talking to him like they're old friends and just chatting away and talking about the date and his, everything that's going on. And he talks about how, he has to chain himself to the bed. So he's like very open, like this is his best friend. And the guy never moves. Now, the interesting thing here is the actor playing the statue is Sean Scott, and he's credited as being named Crawley. Now, in the comics, Crawley is a character. He's a homeless guy who has this fake British accent. And then and he's out in the street and he gets information and deals with one of the other Moon Knight personas, Jake Lockley. Now, there hasn't been any indication that we're going to get Jake Lockley in the series. And there's probably just a nod to Crawley with the street mime thing. But it's pretty cool to see at least they put that in. So, yeah. Then we go back to his apartment, and we end up seeing him go through this montage of trying to stay awake, which, they're bouncing around. It's you could do puzzles, you could read a book, and he's trying to solve a Rubik's Cube one-handed, and he's reading a book on the Egyptian pantheon called the Ened, which is important because it pops up a few times in the episode. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Now, from there, so he's tossing the Rubik's Cube in the air, and he's trying to land it, and then suddenly he wakes up laying on the grass in another country. Possibly Austria? Maybe one of the Netherlands or something? It's hard to tell. But there's lots of mountains and snow-covered Alps. And his jaw is out of place, and he has to pop it back into place. He's desperately trying to figure out what's going on. You think it's Switzerland, huh? Yeah, it could be Switzerland, Netherlands, Austria. I thought Austria just because of the language. But then at one point, Harrow speaks and he talks in ancient Egyptian. So it's hard to tell. But this is also the point where we get to hear the voice of Khonshu for the first time in Mark's head. And what does he say? Go back to sleep, worm. He's not very nice to Steven. Calls him an idiot. and is voiced by F. Murray Abraham, who you may remember from Solier in Amadeus and like 1,000 other movies. I mean, not 1,000, but he's done a lot. And then he tells him to surrender the body to Mark, which is the first indication that there's more than one person living in the body. If you had not seen anything going into this show, and that would be the first time you're like, wait, what do you mean surrender to Mark? Who the hell's Mark? He also reaches in his pocket and pulls out a scarab, and it's pretty much this is the MacGuffin of the series, or at least looks like it's going to be. And if nothing else, it may be the catalyst for what's happening to Stephen. And I'll get to that in the theory section. But we get our first glimpse of Gonshu, like right behind him. And then when he turns around to look at him, instead he's looking at this castle-like thing, looks up and sees a guy in the window, and he waves to him. And the guy nervously waves back, and someone else puts his hat and goes, "What are you doing?" And then pulls out a gun and starts shooting at Stephen. And the other guy does too. And it turns out they're part of the cult that Haro has, and they're looking for, Stephen. They're looking for that body. And they start to give chase, and he starts running through the fields, heads to this little village nearby, and he tries to blend in with the crowd. He puts his hoodie up, and it's neat because he's got a white hood. He's got a leather jacket on and like layers, but he's got this white hood and throws that up, and that's kind of a Moon Knight looking thing. But, you know, they do subscribe to the Marvel thing of all you need to do to disguise yourself is either wear a hat or a hoodie, maybe some sunglasses. But since he didn't have sunglasses, he gets caught. But he gets caught for a different reason. Now, he tries to blend into the crowd and ends up in a gathering that are watching Arthur Harrow, do his kind of David Koresh thing. He's talking to his followers. He's using his power. He pulls somebody up, and he does the judgment thing where he takes his cane and he puts it on their arm, starts to swing it back and forth, and then on his forearm, Harrow has a scale, one of the old-fashioned scales, but across the top are two heads of crocodiles, a symbol of Amit, same as his cane, but the tattoo starts moving when it's judging somebody, and the first person it judges as worthy, and the tattoo kind of turns green, and he goes, "Oh, this is a good man," and he hugs him. And then this older woman comes up, and she says, "I must know," and it goes back and forth, and it comes up that she's a bad person, and she's like, "But I've been good my whole life," and he goes, "I believe you, but Amit judges both your past and your present, and there's a good chance whatever you're going to do is in the future." And then he sucks the life force out of her, and she dies. Yeah. Killing old people, man, that's just what happened to Ethan Hawke. He used to be a nice guy. Now he's killing old people. Well, so the young man was worthy, the old woman wasn't. And she's dead. And then while they're taking the body away, one of the guards comes up and tells Harrow that there was a problem at the exchange, and two of the men were taken out, and the scarab was taken. And he says, "Well, do you think he's still here?" And they're like, "We think so." So he yells out in ancient Egypt, telling everybody to kneel, or something like that. They all kneeled. And poor Stephen doesn't know ancient Egypt, and he stands there for a second and goes, "Oh, bullocks." And then he drops down, and then Harold's like, I know you. You're the mercenary." And Stephen's like, "I'm not a mercenary. I'm a gift shopist," which I'm not sure is even a word. But and he says, "Well, will you give me back my the scarab?" He never says my scarab. He says the scarab. And Stephen's like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And he pulls it out. And then Khonshu's voice is like, "You'll give him nothing." And he's like, he holds it out, and his fist clenches and can't undo it. And he's trying to pry it open. He's like, "I'm not doing this. I swear I'm not." And he finally gets it open and pulls it out of his hand and then holds it out. And when Harrow reaches for it, he swings it away from him and starts marching off. he's like, I'm not doing this. And the whole thing is that Khonshu is trying to control the body. Well, of course, they go after him, start to tackle him, and they start to pry. And once they get the scarab out of his hand, Stephen kind of fits out, his eyes roll up in his head. And then a second later, he's standing there, surrounded by with all these either dead or unconscious bodies around him on the ground. He's holding the scarab in his hand again, and his hand and scarab are covered in blood. And that's, so that little time jump, we get the first indication that Mark was set loose. Well, from there, he escapes. He gets into a cupcake truck and tries to drive off. Well, then Marvel does probably the best thing ever. While this chase is going on, so he's driving this cupcake truck. He even tells us that he doesn't have a license. But he's going down this big windy mountain road in a cupcake truck with other cars coming the other way, like 4 cars behind him. They're playing Wake Me Up by Wham. So you have this guy who's driving the truck, scared for his life, truck full of cupcakes, which look delicious, by the way. And as it's going along, you're hearing, wake me up before you go. I'm not planning on going solo. And it's just such a surreal scene for a very surreal scene. It turned out to be like the perfect song because it just added to the surrealness of the moment. And as he's going down this hill, when the danger gets too extreme, he blacks out and then wakes up. And this situation is, I want to say, better. The immediate situation is resolved. So he's got one guy fighting him in the truck, another guy coming up with a gun. Second later, he's driving the truck again. The guy that was attacking inside the truck is now dead, hanging on the back door, about to fall out. And the car that was about to shoot him is now flipped over behind him, and he's holding the gun. And he's like, ah, And it cuts like that a few times. Khonshu again pops in his head going, let Mark take over, you fool. Why is the idiot back in charge? And he goes, truck. He goes, what? Truck. And you see this logging truck, and it starts to fishtail and comes around. And Stephen does some excellent driving for a guy who doesn't know how to drive, to go outside and just miss it, and the other cars follow. But it's one of those moments like, everybody who knows Final Destination knows those logs will be back. And sure enough, he's going down the hill again, and the 2 cars get either side of him. They're about to shoot. He fades out. Next thing you know, he comes to, and he's going backwards in the cupcake truck. One of the cars just flipped over. Another one just went over the edge. He's got one last truck following him. He's got a gun in his hand, and he throws the gun at the car. And even Khonshu's like, did he just throw the gun? And finally, he turns the truck back around, and it stalls out, and he can't get it started. And the last two guys in the truck pull up. They get out. They got guns. They're walking towards him. And just as they're about to get to him, logs come rolling down the hill and take out both guys. And before he can do anything, he blacks out again, wakes up in his own bed. Chain on his ankle, sand undisturbed, tape on the door. He's thinking the whole thing was a dream. It's got, and even the Humperdinck song is back, So he goes back to his normal rituals, He's sure it's Friday. He's going about things. He's about to go feed Gus, and that's when he looks over and goes, what the fish? Well, what he does is he's about to say, but they cut to him holding Gus in a small blender, carrying it into a pet store, trying to understand why his one-finned goldfish now had 2 fins. He's like, you said they couldn't grow back. And she's like, it didn't, And he says, just like I told you yesterday, I don't sell goldfish with 1 fin on purpose. That's cruelty. And he's like, what do you mean yesterday? I wasn't in here yesterday. And she's like calling him. And then he looks up the clock and sees it's much later than he expected. He thought it was morning, and now it's closer to evening. So he runs and gets ready and gets dressed for his date, because his date's supposed to be. And he goes to the restaurant. He sits there and he's waiting and he's waiting. And it turns out that he calls the girl, and she's mad at him for standing him up 2 days ago. And that's when he learns that it's not Friday, as he believed. It was Sunday. So then we get another sad moment as he orders himself a steak. He has no idea how to order a steak. He orders the good bit. So the guy goes, center cut filet? Yeah. He goes, how do you want that cooked? He goes, really good. I want it good. So, because he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just kind of in pain. And he goes, okay, I'll get that well done for you. And every steak eater who's watching this went, no! This was the worst horror part of the entire show. You don't do a medium well on a filet mignon center cut. No. All right. We're at a good halfway point here. So let's go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll come back and we'll talk more about the pilot episode of Moon Knight in just a minute. We'll be right back.
To be continued. 3 little words that hold the secret to the next great story. 3 words that will thrill you, confound you, give life to new possibilities. Every variation of To Be Continued is a promise of adventure, a promise of excitement, a promise of unseen wonders and unexplored worlds. A promise that every issue you read makes you a part of a never-ending journey. And behind every page, there will be an unopened door waiting for you. This story to be continued at your local comic book shop today. Visit comicshoplocator.com today.
Hey, I'm Garrett Gunn. You might know me from Good Boy, Warhorns, Franklin and Gus, and you're watching The Experience.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Dan Wickline Show here on The Experience. Yes, we're talking Moon Knight here, Episode 1, The Goldfish Problem. And, of course, the Goldfish Problem is that his one-fin goldfish, Gus, suddenly became a two-fin goldfish. But that was just the start of things unraveling. He misses his date because it's now Sunday instead of Friday. And then when he goes back home and starts eating the box of chocolates he had bought Dylan, after calling his mom and telling her what a wonderful date it was, and he'll probably be bringing her around soon, again, to a voicemail, he gets home and he's eating the box of chocolates and realizes there's some scrape marks on the floor underneath near the table. He slides the table over, looks up from the table, sees a loose board up on the wall, climbs up on the table, moves the board, and discovers a cell phone and a key. Now, we don't get any information on the key, but he charges up the cell phone, turns it on, and discovers about 45 to 50 missed calls from somebody named Layla and one from a guy named Ducamp. Now, Ducamp, Layla might be the MCU version of Marlene, who is Moon Knight's love interest in the comics. They may have changed her name to make it more racially appropriate, Egyptian. I don't know. We'll have to see how they're doing that. But Ducamp is the last name of another one of Moon Knight's allies, Jean-Paul or Frenchie Ducamp, who is a fellow mercenary. He's a helicopter pilot and a weapons expert, and he makes a lot of the weapons and stuff for Mark. So we get our, now if that's just a nod to Frenchie, I don't know if we'll actually get him in the series or not. I hope so, because those are all Marlene, Frenchie, Crawley, Jake Lockley. Those are all major parts of Moon Knight too, and I'm hoping we don't lose those and just get nods to them instead of getting them. But while he's looking at the phone, Layla calls back. She's like, "Oh my God, you're alive. Where have you been? I've been trying to call you for months." And that's when we get the time frame of how long, a rough idea of how long Stephen has been in control. And he's like, "Well, why are you calling me Mark?" And she's like, "What's with the accent?" And then eventually she hangs up. And when he wants to go call back, he gets a different voice in his head. It's not Khonshu, it's Mark. And he's telling him, stop looking. Stop trying to figure this out. Because the more he digs into it, the more he's tearing apart this facade that's been created. So he but as Mark is trying to tell Stephen to calm down and stop looking, everything starts to shake and Khonshu starts to show up. Mark tries to get out of the building, or Stephen tries to get out of the building. That's, you've seen in the clips, the scene with Khonshu coming down the hallway, and he's in the elevator trying to close it, and then the old lady gets on, and I lost my contact. Well, I hope you find it. So all that's going on, and then at one point the old lady gets off the elevator, and he's like, "What? How are we back on the 5th floor? This doesn't make any sense." And he turns around, and Khonshu is right behind him, and he blacks out and wakes up on the bus. And while he's on the bus, it's like, oh, and so he's already dressed, he's heading for work, and as he's driving along, he looks and sees on the side of the road, Khonshu is just standing there, and then when he turns back to look, he's gone. He gets to the museum, he gets off, and as the bus is pulling away, he sees still on the bus is Harrow. So Harrow's following him, and Stephen now knows that Harrow is real. Well, he races into the museum and tries to get help, talks to the security guard who still thinks his name is Scotty. And the guy's like, can you keep the guy from coming in? He goes, "It's a free museum. I can't stop anybody." So what happens is Stephen goes in, he gets into a confrontation with Harrow in the middle of the Egyptian exhibit. And Harrow is like, "First thing, I can't believe your name really is Stephen Grant, and that you really are a gift shop guy, that you would actually tell us that. But I want the scarab." And he says, "I don't have it. I can't give you your beetle back. I don't have it." And he's like, "It's not my scarab. The scarab belongs to Amit." And then he talks about how, she was wrongly cast as the boogeyman. She's only the boogeyman for evildoers. And she got tired of waiting for them to do evil deeds. So she judged them for their life, past, present, and future. Surveying the whole life, and then judges them. And then he says how, well, if Amit had been free, she would have stopped people like Hitler and Pol Pot, Nero. She would have stopped the Armenian genocide. They don't get into any MCU references like Thanos or stuff like that, or Sokovia, but they were possibly in there. But the director talked about they decided at one point that they weren't needed and that they could pull them out and let the show be kind of a standalone. Not that it's not connected to the MCU, but they didn't need to wedge those things in there. So if this is their first step into it, they don't need to have seen anything else. Now, while he's doing all this and having this conversation, he starts to judge Steven. He puts the cane on his arms and starts to swing it and pulls up the tattoo, and the scales go back and forth, but they don't stop. And finally, Harold gets this surprised look on his face because he realizes Steven can't be judged. He says, "There's chaos in you." And that's the line from the trailer. And Steven pulls away just as this group of tourists come moving in, and he runs out to escape. And Harold's like, "Let him go." So later that night, Steven is stuck doing inventory because he's been late. And it's locking up time. He's closing. The lights are going out. He's closing down. He's got his backpack. He's about to head out. And he hears a dog in the museum. And, of course, he goes to look for the dog because he's that guy. He's very nice. And, of course, as he's looking for the dog, he's walking through exhibits and stuff. He passes by crocodiles, which, again, a myth. But he goes by this mirror that's like a 2-layer mirror. And we see 2 reflections of him in the mirror, except when he keeps moving, they stop. The 2 reflections stop and look around like they're looking for something. And, what turns out the dog is actually a jackal. And it starts to chase him while Harold pops up over the loudspeaker of the intercom and says, "Steven from the gift shop, give me the scarab and the jackal won't tear you apart." And again, Steven doesn't know where the scarab is. So he tries to run and get away. And finally, he locks himself in what may be the biggest bathroom I've ever seen in a public museum. And with so many mirrors everywhere. And while he's in there, Mark Spector starts talking to him through the mirror. And this is the first time we actually get a good look. And we see the difference in Oscar Isaac's mannerisms. Stephen Grant is a little hunched over, very nervous, very shaky. Oscar Isaac, shoulders back, head up, very confident. And he tells him, like, "Look, I can save us, but you have to give me control, and you can't fight me for it." And Steven starts going, "This isn't real," smacking himself as the jackal is trying to claw through the door. And Mark's like, "Look, that's going to come through and tear us apart unless you let me deal with this." He says, "You will not die, but I have to take over." And finally, Steven just kind of leans back, his eyes roll up, and we see the bandages start to swirl around him for the first time. But then the door closes down, and we go into the hallway, and we see the jackal run in. And then we see, like, a sink come flying out, and we hear this big scuffle. And then when we finally turn the corner back to look in the bathroom, we see a fully costumed Moon Knight beating the crap out of the jackal, just standing over it, wailing on this thing. Cape spewed out, just boom, boom. So we just see him from behind. And then he finishes, he stands up, he turns. We get a frontal look at him. He walks right towards the camera, and then it cuts to credits. And normally I see a show like that, and it's like, "No, I want more. No, I want more." I was so impressed by that cut that, yes, here's the hero. Here's our hero moment cut. It was too perfect that I'm like, no. This was the perfect length for this episode. So from that point of view, I thought that was absolutely perfect. Now, we go into the credits, and the credits are always interesting because you never know what you're going to get with them. And here you get some good music. You get the moon, like various stages of the moon. and you get a lot of Egyptian iconography. But there's one particular plate, plate there's a magnifying glass. There's a picture of, looks like Mark and Layla holding each other like a Polaroid picture. There's a compass. There's a bullet for you really young people. Polaroid picture was a picture you used to take the picture with the camera, and the picture itself came out and slowly developed, and you got to see the picture as a self-developing film. Yeah. Feeling old. Okay. So, but with the compass and then the mirror, the magnifying glass pulls back, and we see a wedding ring, and it makes you wonder if Mark and Layla are supposed to be married here. So I think there's a lot more to Layla, and she might have been in the museum scene when Harrow showed that the people around him, like a security guard and stuff like that, were part of the occult, because there was a woman that looked like the actress May Calmoy, that looked like the actress in the scene, so that showed her tattoo. So maybe that was her. I'm not 100% sure though, and I haven't heard anybody else mention that either. So it could just be my mind making that. But we get all that, and then it ends up rolling into the Moon Knight logo. So they're not bad logo. I mean, they're cool looking. There are a lot of really great graphics. But other than the one thing with the magnifying glass and the wedding ring, I don't know if there's a lot of clues to pull out of there. I'm sure there's some internet people that are going to just dissect the hell out of them and come out and say, well, this means this and this means this, and that's great. And I will report on it when that happens. But for now, they're just cool credits. All right. I came out of this with two theories. Now, we get a lot of setup. We don't have a lot of ties to the MCU, and I don't think this is going to tie to the MCU. But there's two things that stand out to me. The first is that I think that Stephen Grant is a new persona, only a few months old, and it's one that was created by Mark Spector, to basically hide from his enemies. Now, I realize that physically he still looks the same, but if he changes the persona, then we are talking about, we're talking about Pantheon of Gods here. So maybe by becoming another persona, not just a secret identity, but another actual personality, it allows him to hide. So maybe that's what I'm thinking, is that Mark created Stephen as a way to hide, away from his enemies. Now, but I also think that Mark is, up until this episode, Mark has been taking care of Stephen. And that's why he knew that, and he's paying attention. He knew that Stephen liked Dylan and went out and asked her out. When they got back from Switzerland, Austria, wherever it was, Gus was probably dead. And he didn't want Stephen to find it that way. So he went like a mother would, or a parent would if their child's goldfish died while they were at school, went to the pet store and tried to replace it. But finding one with a missing fin is a little difficult. And even Mark is not such a badass assassin or a mercenary that he's going to cut a fin off of a goldfish. So I think that basically Mark is nurturing Stephen and has helped set up this persona. And he's probably the one sending the postcards and doing stuff like that. He probably set up a random phone number for him to call so he'd have someone to talk to the mother thing. He probably even paid Crawley a huge tip to, not Crawley, Crawley. Paid him Crawley to listen to him when he comes up. That's what I'm thinking, is that Mark actually set up this life that is Stephen's. The second thing is, I think the scarab is what caused the problems. Because if you think about it, when Stephen suddenly wakes up when he's not supposed to for the first time, he's got the scarab on him. When they take the scarab away, Mark is able to take back control. And then as soon as he's got the scarab back, he wakes back up again. Or Stephen wakes back up again. So I think that the scarab itself has something to do with Stephen being forced back to the front or back into control. Because again, you notice that it doesn't happen once he's back in London and the scarab is put away. He doesn't wake up in places like that again. But then he starts pushing it, and that's when things start happening. That's when he blacks out and stuff. But I think that the scarab is what broke the pattern. So I'd be interested to see what the scarab really means, how it's going to affect him in the future, and is the scarab the key for freeing Amit? There's a lot of questions there. So overall, I think the acting in this series has been absolutely top-notch. But then we really only spend any real time with Stephen Grant / Mark Spector, who's played by Oscar Isaac, and with Arthur Harrow, played by Ethan Hawke, who are both amazing actors. So it's interesting to me that those are the ones that we really spend time with. We don't really spend time with anybody else having conversations. None of the guards really talk that much. Donna probably has the next amount of lines, and she's not a very nice person. We get a few minutes with Dylan. Crawley never says anything. The old lady, basically line count is those two, and then everybody else is like way down here. So you're really only judging the acting on two people, but it's phenomenal. I think Oscar Isaac's making choices to differentiate the different personas, and it's coming across really well. I know when I watched the trailer, the accent for Stephen really threw me off. I'm like, what's he trying to be, the chimney sweep for Mary Poppins? But now that I've watched the episode twice, it just seems perfectly natural, and I get what they're going for with all that. So now Stephen is very different from in the comics, but then in a lot of ways, Stephen was a created persona that Mark made when he came back from Egypt, in the same way that the Shadow created Lamont Cranston. Well, actually, Lamont Cranston was real, and he took over Lamont Cranston's life, but you get the idea that the rich playboy thing. Now, maybe, but they're doing this because I think in a way they're making this more accessible to new people. If he was just a rich playboy and it was, should we go with the rich playboy or should we go with the mercenary? Who do you think is going to get fans' attention? Who's going to make people be sympathetic? No, but the guy with the sleeping disorder that has the one-fin goldfish and misses his date because of sleep disorder, that guy's going to get a lot of sympathy, and you're going to really like him. JD says, I thought that Oscar's accent was a deliberate choice and Americans' idea of a British accent. From what he said, it's from a very specific part of England that accent comes from. And it is basically the area where Orthodox Jews come from in London or in England, and that's what the accent is. And it's because Mark Spector is supposed to be a Jewish character, he wanted to pick an accent that would go hand in hand with the representation of Jewish people in England. That's what he says. I'm not going here and there about it. I'm okay with it. So, also, you said I didn't get that at first with the scarab. I think I watched these things with like a magnifying glass, and that's the thing that came out to me was that everything was fine until he was holding the scarab. And that's when suddenly, because Khonshu was surprised that Stephen was awake. And I think they've probably been doing this for months where, Stephen is the daytime, and then when Khonshu needs Mark, that's when he comes out. They do the mission, then he goes back. And now it's all screwed up, and that's, I think, because of the scarab. So, but that's my thought on that and on the episode. Let me tell you guys what's coming up next on the experience. I thought it was the stay awake thing. Stephen was trying to take control and found out it wasn't his. I get the feeling that he's been doing the stay awake thing for a long time. All right, coming up next on the experience, What's in the Box with Miss Jen is at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Miss Jen grabs a random box from the warehouse, opens up and tries to sell whatever, or offers up whatever's in it. You don't know what it's going to be. It might be the severed head of a former customer who asked for too many specialty books. I don't know, but you will see on What's in the Box. Then is the show that Space Cadets comes on at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. That is Shanice and Jenna and Bean, and they're going to talk about Batman and driving into on today's show. Okay, they're driving into on today's show. Oh, they're diving into the Batman. I got it now. I learned to read today. Isn't that neat? Then 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific will be is our game show that nobody can pronounce with Miss Jen, followed by tonight's late show, Kicking It with Henri at 10 p.m. Pacific, or 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. So we got a great lineup here. JD, did we find out about the Moon Knight stuff?
No. Kyle says that it didn't sell on the show, but a lot of people, lurk in the background and then email Nick directly. So we'll find out tomorrow.
Okay, sounds good. So stick around for the rest of the shows. I will be back on Monday, where I might do a deep dive into the Enad, since that's coming up a lot, and we'll go from there. Thank you for sticking around. See you tomorrow, or see you Monday, Tuesday.